Welcome to the Voices That Propel Us, stories of justice, action, and community, a space where justice meets action and community voices rise. Each episode, we bring you stories from the front lines, changemakers, disruptors, and everyday heroes who are building a more just, equitable, and liberated world. This is more than a podcast. It's a call to listen, learn, and move together. You were just listening to music from the incredibly talented Stephen Kong. You can find him on Spotify and Bandcamp. Today we have with us Manny Faces. Manny Faces is an award-winning journalist, TEDx speaker, and cultural strategist who helps organizations remix how they innovate, educate, and uplift by unlocking the untapped potential of hip-hop culture. He is the host of the acclaimed podcast, Hip Hop Can Save America, and author of the Cornel West endorsed book, Hip Hop Can Save America, Inspiration for the Nation from a Culture of Innovation, where he spotlights the often overlooked ways hip-hop drives fresh solutions in education, health, social justice, leadership, and beyond. His work bridges disciplines, dismantles silos, and challenges assumptions about culture's role in advancing progress. With more than 25 years of experience in journalism, media, and community engagement, Manny has collaborated with mission-driven organizations and spoken at universities and conferences worldwide. He connects insight and storytelling in a way that equips audiences to challenge old assumptions and embrace bold solutions. Well, hello. I'm really excited and grateful that you're here today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you very much for your time and for inviting me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, like I was telling me, I think that the topic that you talk about, just like hip hop and social justice, is really like important and just essential for social justice movements. And thank you for reaching out. I'm excited to have you. But yeah, just starting off. So for listeners meeting you for the first time, who is Manny Faces, and what moment or experience put you on this path of elevating hip hop as a force for social change?
Thank you. Manny Faces is not my real name. Of course, it's a pseudonym. My real name is Bobby Elbows. Mm-hmm. I'm just kidding. That's just a silly joke. That's ridiculous. I don't even know why I started with that. I generally consider myself, we all do many things. At the core of it all, I'm a journalist, and I'm an independent journalist. I've been doing this for quite some time, where I've been covering different aspects of hip hop music and culture independently. I started for a while doing it in New York City, where I was based for a long time, and I was basically sort of a local music reporter, right? So I was covering the independent scene, and I was doing all of that work. I worked in the daytime for a newspaper, for an alternative weekly. I was cutting my teeth in the journalism world, but I was also a hip hop guy. I've been doing music for since I was a teenager. I was making beats, and I had a home studio, and I had a crew, and we were making demos, and I'm a DJ, and I did remixes, and so I brought kind of those worlds together, and covered that aspect of hip hop music and culture in and around New York City for about a decade on my own. I started my own publication called Birthplace Magazine. Birthplace for the birthplace of hip hop. And I was one of the few, I was the only one that was concentrated just on the New York area, which is strange because everyone thinks like New York is where hip hop was born. But the industry had moved elsewhere. And so I was just kind of doing that on my own. And I covered a lot of the independent, folks, the artists, the weekly showcases, like that kind of cool underground indie scene a lot, not the superstar stuff, And I found some really interesting people who were doing some really interesting intersections with hip hop. And so we talk about social justice, but teachers who were, they were rapping on the weekends, but they were using hip hop in like their classroom to like engage students. And I started learning that a little bit more of that. They were going to do workshops on the weekend with young men in Rikers Island or in a juvenile detention center doing rap writing workshops. And I started realizing there were people doing like this interesting intersection across activism or health and wellness or even science and technology in ways that I kind of knew made sense to me as a hip hop guy, but I was hearing more about them, and I felt that the world wasn't And so I decided that that would be sort of my mission, is to amplify the folks who are doing that kind of work. And
Yeah.
that's, long story short, how I got to be doing what I do today.
No, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so if you could actually talk more about that. So, was there a specific moment when you realized that hip hop wasn't just culture for you, but it can be used as a tool for justice, education, and innovation?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting as hip hop, as folks who, and anyone who's kind of closely attached to the music and the
Hmm.
culture will tell you this, that we kind of feel this inherently, like it's kind of baked into what we know of the culture, especially like we're of a certain age. Folks who
No.
are not that familiar with, hip hop as a culture don't even think of it as a culture, right? A lot of people just
Yeah.
stop at music, genre of music, on the radio, a popular genre of music, a crappy genre of music, a great genre, depending on who you are and how you feel. But what folks who've been really attached to, I guess, the overarching umbrella culture that music is just a part of, right? So
Yeah.
there's a sort of a hip hop way of looking at the world. There's an ethos, there's lifestyle, there's linguistics, there's fashion, there's all these different things that have kind of trickled out of the art forms. And when you encompass all of that, or when you engage in all of those things, you realize, now we're younger at the time, we're 18, 20, 25. We don't realize, hey, we're part of a culture. Like we're just
Mhm.
doing the thing. Right. So we end up doing the thing long enough. But then in the 90s and, especially, there started to be an understanding, I guess, among the cultural participants, right, among the community,
Yeah.
that there's something else here, that this is sort of more than just entertainment.
Right.
And so you start picking up on some of the stuff if you start reading, at the time, the Source magazine, or, and you start realizing that Howard University put forth the first academic conference, the first hip hop
Oh,
academic conference in
okay.
like
Very nice.
1991.
Okay.
Right. And so a bunch of, college students were starting to put together, yeah, it's entertainment. Yes, it's fun. Yes, it's, all these artistic elements,
Hmm.
but it's also a community. And it's also, if you look at the definition of culture, a group of people following with certain traits and different characteristics and reference, that's a culture. And so they start saying, well, let's look at this. Let's engage and explore this. So coming up at the same time, you start to kind of feel the same thing. You start to realize it. Now, as I get older,
Yeah.
maybe we're college aged or a little bit older, we start realizing things, from a sociological point of view, if we're that kind of, thinker.
Yeah.
So it was around that age. Now I'm the son of a sociologist. I'm the son of a college professor.
Okay.
So perhaps it came to me earlier than, than some of my peers, where I start realizing, like I said, there's this anthropological thing happening here.
Yeah.
And so it was around, those years, 90s into 2000s, when it's just so exploded as a genre of music and
Yeah.
as an entertainment, and you start seeing, rap and advertising and everywhere, right? But a lot of us were also realizing, well, no, there's this cultural angle. You start realizing that some of the things that rap artists were talking about in their music were
Mhm.
actually forms of journalism, right? They're telling a
Yeah.
story. They're telling a story about their way of life, their neighborhoods, their trials and tribulations, what they see. And a lot of that gets written off as, either being vulgar or either being,
Yeah.
just, gangster glorification. But a lot of it, was actually just a representation of what folks were going through. And maybe it was embellished, or maybe it was coalesced from a bunch of different sources. But nonetheless, it was giving people an interesting angle, as to what folks were going through, and they're reflecting in their art.
Hmm.
And we start seeing this a lot later in life, when you start having, sort of conscious rappers talking about this explicitly. So you'd have, artists like Public Enemy, of course, everyone knows, but, Poor Righteous Teachers, and then Most Def, and, and Talib Kweli, and they're actually now explicitly, I mean, going back as far back as The Message, which is the one song everyone kind of knows. And so now you start seeing it like in the music, but then you see these individuals also talking on TV shows like Yo MTV Raps about, taking their life experiences and putting it in music. So it was around those times that I think a lot of us growing up at the same time as, I'm roughly about the same age as hip hop. We started realizing that there's a lot more to it, this thing of ours, than just, music on the radio and something that, shake your butt to in the club, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that you are able to explore that because I feel like it does get a lot of like negativity in sometimes like mainstream media or
Sure.
especially during around that time too, just like gangster rap
Y-
and stuff, just like, oh, this is so
Absolutely.
bad. But like no, it's like no, but if you actually listen to the music, there's so many messages about like just societal like inequality and just
Yeah.
like there's so many messages behind that music. So,
Yeah.
why are you just like bashing it when you're not actually listening to the music? So, I think it's
Right.
cool that you're studying it like this.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, no, even if you look at, and there's not, I mean, there's not a lot of like societal, like you just mentioned, like with Two Live Crew, you know what I mean? But at the time,
Yeah.
their fight against the censorship of their lyrics was actually a pretty
Mm,
pioneering case for First Amendment rights in America. So even
yeah.
if you look at and you don't like, the content or it's the freedom to say what they want, which is
Yeah.
supposed to be protected in this country, and may have that court case alone. So I guess what I'm saying is like there's lessons to be learned,
Hmm.
through all this. It's not just like cursory level, like you say, you hear a little bit, you don't like it, you don't understand it, and you dismiss it out of hand.
Right. Right.
And then there's, like I said, there is specific. If you go later in life, just a few years ago, I mean, Kendrick Lamar won a Pulitzer Prize.
Oh,
Like
I didn't know that. Okay. That's
for
cool.
his
Yeah.
writing, for his music.
Hmm.
That doesn't happen to just
Yeah.
a low IQ, thing that I think a lot of people
Yeah.
seem to pin on rap music. So it
Right.
gets a bad rap. And I think also what you said earlier, you said that, mainstream media often leads you to believe this. And again, anyone listening might be like, you haven't convinced me yet, Manny. I'm like, it's fine, but I'll keep going. I remember that I looked in about, I think it was 2023, New York Magazine came out with a 30-year retrospective, right,
Okay.
of the year 1993. And I
Okay.
think it was an article called like 1993, the year that changed everything, right? And there was so many like social and cultural and
Yeah.
entertainment, stuff that happened in 1993, right around that area, 1993, 1994. And they were looking back as like all these amazing things happened. And they focused a little bit on rap music, and they focused on A Tribe Called Quest,
Hmm.
which is, a very beloved, not a gangster rap group, not a very creative, very
Yeah.
artistic, very lyrical, very forward thinking, very socially conscious, like a great, one of the great rap groups of all time. You had the Wu-Tang Clan was starting to come out again, and everyone loves the Wu-Tang Clan. You still had artists like Queen Latifah that was, doing music that was very, pro-black, pro-woman, all these great things that they were touting 30 years later. I went back and I looked at all of the newspaper articles in
Hmm.
1993 in the New York
Okay.
Times. So the
Okay.
nation's paper of record, right? Where everyone of anyone of intellect would get their news, where
Hmm.
my dad would get his news every day.
Okay.
And in 1993, not one positive article in the entire year about anything rap or hip hop related that I could find in the archives. It was all radio station bans, harmful lyrics.
Yeah.
Reverend Calvin Butts, in New York, runs over CDs with a bulldozer to protest,
Yeah.
vulgarity in music. Rapper arrested for assault. Fight breaks out at some club, some some concert or whatever.
Hmm.
That's what people were getting
Right.
as their perception of this thing that they don't participate in. They have no cultural connection to. And so it's being reported that all these terrible, terrible things happened. But yet 30 years later, everyone's like, nah, it was one of the most creative times in American music history. But at the time, and so we have to fight back, those of us who want to, let people know that there's good here. There is
Yeah.
brilliance here. There's life-saving connections here. Like there's things that we can do to save lives that nothing else has been able to do. We have to get through that barrier of it's not what you think it is. It's not all
Yeah.
negative. It's not all terrible. It's, I mean, at the end of the day, if it, you could be ignorant to that fact in the fact that you just don't, no one's told you this, no one showed it to you, and that's fine. If you become willfully ignorant to it, you don't want to explore and find out more, then we have to start questioning why. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah.
Okay. No, thank you for sharing that. I love your insights, and I also love just the diversity of work that you've had. So your work spans journalism, podcasting, authorship, and public speaking. So what do you think is the thread that connects all of these together?
I mean, it's get the message to people in the way that they are, can receive it, right? So,
Yeah.
I when I got into journalism, I fancied myself a decent writer, but that's not how I got in, because I was a graphic designer. I was, and I learned,
Uh-huh.
I taught myself how to do that,
Yeah.
because I needed to make flyers for my home studio, and so I was learning graphic design. But I got in, and I was lucky enough to work with a bunch of really talented journalists. They were actually like some of the best in the business. We went on to win
Wow.
over 400 awards at that newspaper, many of which I eventually got, to be part of. My dad was a brilliant writer and orator,
Hmm.
professor and speaker, and wrote, a million papers. So I got a lot through osmosis. Of course, as my dad was a college professor, I went to college for about 2.5 seconds. Um,
Yeah.
shoemaker's son doesn't have any shoes kind of thing. But I did become a pretty decent independent scholar since then. I think he'd be okay with where I'm at now. But I learned a lot from him through osmosis and just through talking. And, he always talked to me about his work. And I learned a lot, basically got a, pretty good education in
Wow.
sociology just by having him as a dad.
Yeah.
And so I like to, and I'm a DJ. See there's the thread line.
Oh, okay. Okay.
As a DJ, you want people to hear, right, what you're delivering them. You
Right.
have this idea of controlling the crowd through the music, right?
Hmm.
You want to match their mood. You want to read the energy. You want to respond to it. You want to shift it. You want to adjust it so that they're tuned in, so that you guys are
I
on the
love that.
same wavelength. And so, and you also are perfectly happy putting them onto something new that they didn't know, they didn't hear before, and they're like, and you attract their attention, and like, oh, what is this? This is interesting. This is right. So as a DJ, as an intellectual, that's what we do, right? I have some facts. I have an analogy. I have an anecdote. I have some research. I have a oral history that I can share with you
Hmm.
that you haven't heard before. And you're going to be like, oh, I like this. Tell me more. I like this vibe, this intellectual vibe. So
Yeah.
as a DJ, I think I've always wanted to deliver information like I delivered music. And that would be through writing, which I, like I said, was pretty good at.
Hmm.
And through years, that's kind of how I did it.
Hmm.
But I've always been forward thinking in terms of media and mediums.
Okay.
And so I was very early on podcasting, for example. I mean, shoot, I was doing podcasting, a form of it, in like 2011,
Um,
like 2012, like going that far back. This service called Blog Talk Radio, I had a weekly call-in radio show called the New York Hip Hop Report, which was the companion to the blog, to the online publication.
okay.
So, and that's I started realizing that some people will engage with you that way.
Hmm.
Some will write, will read what you've written and they'll engage that way. And so it's just a matter of finding the different avenues and ways to reach people that are now pretty available
Hmm.
to us through technology. And I'll do it all. I'll figure out a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit of social media, a little bit of writing, a little bit of now we do
Yeah.
I do a live stream show on YouTube. I've done
Okay.
some video essays. So it's moving with the times. And just finding ways to, I guess, meet people where they are, but being a DJ and being not afraid
Yeah.
to remix or to mash up some things and
Yeah.
and that's the hip hop way. The hip hop way is, you remix everything and
Hmm.
you find new and exciting ways to reinvent what exists already
Yeah.
in a way that hasn't been done before. In my case, for the benefit of bringing, I think, important information to the world. Some people use it to, for commerce and for making,
Hmm.
products that sell and to be consumed. And that's cool too. But the way
Yeah.
I do it is I use the same kind of philosophies to try to find ways to, deliver things like a DJ would.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really love them. Thank you for talking about the thread. So, the title of your book and podcast really caught my eye. So they're
Mm.
titled "Hip Hop Can Save America." So I just love to hear your thoughts. What do you mean by save, and what is that? What is it that hip hop is actually saving us from?
Yeah, no, I mean that's the crux of it. It sounds lofty. It sounds insane.
I love that. No, yeah.
Again, to those who aren't familiar, it may seem a little bit out of the realm of logic, because again, if you picture this as just entertainment, or even like I said, the negative stuff that we talk about, even if it was just entertainment, I mean, you can't say that movies can save America. It's not, it's a little bit weird.
Yeah.
When I say save. Well, I'll take it back. You asked earlier, like when I started to see, hip hop as a vehicle for social change, right?
Right.
Part of that was that I started meeting with those folks who were, again, using hip hop in schools, right? Let's just say, and it's actually a pretty, it's not burgeoning, like it's a pretty established field, hip hop pedagogy, hip hop based pedagogy. Branching off of culturally sustainable, culturally responsive, or culturally affirming pedagogy, which is, a way of teaching, goes back to the 70s and 80s, and one of the pioneers of this is in my book, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, and there have been others. And the idea is that when you want to reach young people, we can't have a sort of one size fits all approach.
Right.
When you think of culture, or when you think of demeanor or behavior, I mean, this makes sense. You shouldn't normally. We would think, some of us would think that, of course, you would. I got 5 kids. I got 6 kids. I don't treat them all the same way. Like, I have to deal with this one a little bit differently than this one. They have different personalities. They have different motivations that I have to tap into, right?
Yeah.
But we don't do that in school. We don't do that in schools. Schools are very, very structured. They're very, firm. They're very, this is the way it is. It's very outdated. If you ask a lot of folks, like, people who are school reformists would say this is outdated. This is, overly Eurocentric. This is built for when young people just had to get through to college so they could go work in a factory. That's why the chairs are lined up and everything is very much like top down. And so there's been a lot of talk over the years of educational reform. One of the big ones is that when you come into a community, that isn't of that demographic, right? That standardized, Eurocentric or traditional demographic, and you try to teach the same way, there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect right away. These are folks that don't necessarily adhere by the same cultural, reference and look at the world the same way and talk the same way and understand the same way and learn the same way. So it would make sense. And again, my dad was a sociologist, but he was very much education minded. And I learned this a long time ago. You try to teach to the kid. You meet them where they are. You try to, work with them. So if you look at like education in America and you say, well, not only is education in America like pretty terrible overall compared to the rest of the world, but it's even more so in communities of color, traditionally marginalized communities, where there haven't been resources, they've been underfunded and, under-resourced and underloved, for the most part by sort of like the powers that be. Well, how do we fix that? And so when I started realizing that, well, the systems aren't designed necessarily for, and again, we're starting at a place that a lot of people are going to have a problem even getting to. But if we can show that we're starting from a place where it's just not the right, for lack of a better term, like vibes. The vibes aren't immaculate, right? It's not necessarily working. Whatever you're doing isn't working. And I started realizing these hip hop educators who were bringing the music and the culture into the classroom were showing that young people were becoming more engaged. They were paying attention to whatever it is. I'm talking about across all kind of subject matters, science, English, math, right? Believe me, you could teach literary devices by showing them Shakespeare. You can also teach literary devices by showing them Jay-Z. Like they're there. Literary devices are literary devices. They work. They're all over the place. So why not just show them? You can show them both, and do that. And so I started realizing, I talked to a guy named Sage Salvo who had a program called Words Live. And that's exactly what he did. He was showing, here's the Shakespeare thing we're trying to teach you. Here's the Jay-Z equivalent. Yeah. Oh, now it just clicks. Now you get it, because these are young people that this is the language. This is their, their cultural reference. This is what they like. And now you can apply it in a way that actually works. Now, seems nice, seems theoretical, but now there started to become research that shows that it
Yeah.
can work, that it is making improvements. There was a program called Fresh Prep that was in New York City that I came across when I started doing this research. In New York, we have these standardized tests called Regents exams. And you have to pass the Regents exams to pass high school. So again, in these communities of color, in these, these rough and tumble so-called neighborhoods, kids are failing. They're failing the Regents exam. Some of them failed 2 or 3 times. They're not going to pass high school. Well, Fresh Prep started bringing in teaching artists, right? So rap artists that were, maybe had one foot in the education space already, or just, pretty intellectual, or just, had the right mindset for this, to work with teachers to build basically curriculum, in rap format about the material that they needed to use to pass the tests. You and I know that we could remember songs that we were singing when we were 6 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old. Like, we could recite word for word. So they just said, well, it's the same philosophy. It's the same way of, if I memorize it from the book or if I memorize it in a song, who cares? I'm memorizing it.
Yeah.
Up to almost 80% of those students that had failed were able to go on and pass the Regents exam after this program that lasted a few weeks.
Wow.
Then I meet Dr. Ian Lee. I'm going to do this a lot, so people take notes, because each one of these names, you can go down and follow their rabbit hole. Dr. Ian Levy, who was the 2016 New York, he's in the book too, New York State School Counselor of the Year, was also a rapper. He liked rapping in his time, his spare time. He's working in some, one of these neighborhoods, and he starts saying, hey, listen, I know when I'm younger, when I'm coming up, I was stressed out. I'd write raps about it, write songs about it. When we were young, they'd be like, write a poem about how you feel. I don't know if anyone's going to write poetry these days, but if you tell them to write a rap song, they will. Okay. They absolutely will. Everyone plays around with rapping. Every young person today, at some point or another, fancies themselves, a pretend rapper. And so he started saying, hey, school, can I start doing a rap writing workshop for some of my kids? They're troubled. They're going through stuff. I know this might be a little way of getting in. He's trained. He's trained as a counselor. He's gone through all the master's degrees, regular stuff, but he also understands that this connection can trump, for lack of a better term, those kind of traditional ways of one-on-one. And the school's like, rap? I don't know, man. He's like, no, listen. And they're like, well, all right, but do it after school or at the lunch time. And then he was like, no one wants to come in from their lunch and do it. But he did it. And he started having little sessions with some of these kids where they're writing and they're recording, to the point where, fast forward, he becomes so successful, he turns part of his school counselor's office into a recording studio.
Okay. Young
people start coming in. And again, young people. We were young people. They don't like talking about their deepest fears and what's happening in these streets. These are hard lives that some of these kids are going through. They're not opening up. They're not vulnerable. They got to, you got to put up a shield. You got to put up a block. You can't be seen that way. But through this, he's got them not only talking to him, but talking to each other. Group counseling, one-on-one counseling. It's making an impact where traditional efforts, they would have blown them off. Okay. At the end of the semester, they've made an entire mixtape of songs together. Okay. A whole themed mixtape where they've all gotten this stuff out, to the point where the next year, kids from that program are telling the new kids coming in, hey, man, I heard you going through some stuff. Come down to the studio. Dr. Levy got us. He gives us a space we could, talk about. Where are you seeing this happen in these kind of, situations? Other than these examples I'm coming across. So it just started becoming really obvious that there were things happening that could, as I say, address, alleviate, and in some cases, I think, eliminate some of those disparities that we're seeing.
I love that.
Which is where I think the save part comes from, to fix those disparities that aren't being fixed, honestly, any other way.
No, thank you for bringing that up, and thank you so much for explaining that. But actually, I was also a sociology major. I went to UC Berkeley.
So
Yeah, and I also studied ethnic studies, specifically Asian American studies. So I think talking about like racial disparities and race in
Hmm.
general is really important to me. And I saw that you're a cultural strategist as well. So,
Right.
with the next question, I just wanted to talk more about this. So, hip
Yeah.
hop was born from deeply marginalized Black and Brown communities. So, how do you see racial disparities show up in the stories that you document today?
I think that, hip hop is so great because not only one, it can, it's still telling you about those, those issues. It's still, like I say, I look at hip hop as journalism, or I try to find the
Right.
journalism in hip hop, the documentation,
Yeah.
the lived history, the lived experiences, right? The oral histories. This
Hmm.
is what a lot of these artists are doing.
Yeah.
So you still see that that's prevalent in some of the, some of the music and associated art forms. When I talk to, I give these examples.
Yeah.
When I talk to Dr. Lauren Kelly, who, good friend now, who works out of Rutgers University, and she says, well, she talks to young people about, maybe what they're going through and
Okay.
using sort of this conduit, music as a way to kind of like, I don't have to like their music because we're
Uh-huh.
old school. We like our type of rap. They like their type of rap, and never do those trains often meet. But it provides us a way of getting, into their minds, and we could tie in and hear about some of the ways that race and other isms, right? Because there's other
Right.
isms
Mhm. Yeah,
are
for sure.
appearing in their lives by using sort of hip hop as that conduit, and and I think the results are what I'm looking at now. Again, if I
Mhm.
say "Save America" means uplift all marginalized communities,
Yeah.
some people will be like, we don't want that.
Yeah.
We don't
I
want
know.
America to be that. And I'm
Mhm.
saying, what I'm saying is that hip hop provides uniquely powerful ways of doing that. And it's not just the Black and Brown communities. I think
Right.
that that's where,
Mhm.
communities have been certainly the most marginalized, the most oppressed. And
Mm.
so I think that it's most needed there. But the thing about hip hop is that we're talking about a worldwide thing, right? That's in
Yeah.
every nation in the world, in every community, and in any place on the planet, and so this will work to help other traditionally marginalized communities that
Right.
aren't Black and Brown. It can happen in Asian American communities. It can
Mhm.
happen
Yeah,
in
for
poor
sure.
white communities. So I don't want to make it seem like it can fix racism, although
No, it
I
has a
do it.
big, yeah, it's a big influence though.
I do address it in the book because when
Hmm.
you look at hip hop, and again, Toni Blackman, who's a wonderful artist herself, she's a writer. She has a great book called The Wisdom of the Cipher, which talks about the idea of the cipher, right? That circular
Okay.
performance space that hip hoppers work in.
Yeah.
And when you're a dancer or you're a rapper and you perform in this cipher,
Hmm.
there's this sort of communal thing happening. And I've written about the cipher, and I've done some video essays about how this looks in real life. And it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what you look like, what your background is,
Hmm.
ethnicity, all that. If you're in the hip hop cipher, you authentically respect the hip hop culture, right? You're
Yeah.
welcome in that cipher. And it's
Okay.
very interesting to see that. And Toni Blackman says, you could pick me up. This is from Toni Blackman. She says, you could pick me up and put me anywhere in the world
Hmm.
where there are people. Like if in the ocean, this doesn't work. There's sharks. Anywhere there's people.
Yeah.
And you give me sometimes a few minutes, at most a
Okay.
couple of hours, and I'm going to find hip hop,
Mm.
and I will have a place to eat,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I will have probably a place to sleep. I'll have community, even though I don't look like them. I don't
Yeah.
speak like them. I'm a Black woman from America. I might be in Uzbekistan. Doesn't matter. I'll find it, and I'll be part of a community that's global. And so when you look at that, I don't know if this is entirely your question, but you somewhere in hip hop's DNA
Yeah.
is this thing of unity. People, again, for all the bashing that hip hop and rap music takes, like it's really built on a foundation of what is known throughout the culture of peace, love, unity, and having fun.
Yeah.
Peace, love, unity, and having fun. That's like core tenets of hip hop. And you can see that globally. So I sit back and I said, well, where else?
Hmm.
Where else could you find? And again, I'm not; these aren't things I've invented. KRS One, great rap artist and lecturer, and has gone on to do some other stuff. In a in a lecture in the Netherlands, I think it was back in, I don't know, 2000 and something, brother. You can find it on YouTube.
Okay.
He says, in the United States, we have this thing, this ideal, and it's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Mm-hmm.
I have a dream that one day all the, my children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Mm-hmm. And he says, nowhere in the world does that actually happen.
Yeah.
Right? Nowhere in the world, certainly not in the United States, but
right.
We see racial problems everywhere.
Yeah.
He says, nowhere in the world does that happen except in hip hop.
Okay.
And when I first heard that, I said, okay. And I think of the cipher, and I think what Tony Blackman says. And so what I posit is that in its core, in the DNA, is something that knows how to bring people together. There's something communal. There's something, prehistoric. Because this goes back to the beginning of humanity when we would be in drum circles and there would be griots and there would be, this circular cipher of unity and community. And nothing I would say, and I'm waiting for, I've challenged people, I said, show me something that does it better than that. Not sports, not religion, and certainly not politics. What other, because religion is also very, factions and, you know what I mean? Like, it's all very much, no, you can't be that. You have to be this. And hip hop's like, you could be anything. You could be from anywhere. You can come into a hip hop cipher and play the violin. Mm-hmm. And guess what? You rocking with us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You could be in a different language. We might not understand a word you're saying, but you're rocking with us. You could be from, so all of these things. So when you say like, how do I see race and racism and all the isms appear through hip hop? It comes back to me saying that hip hop has the ability to address, alleviate, and in some cases eliminate some of society's most, prevalent and dastardly ills, racism among them. I believe that it has that ability, and we haven't fully tapped into it or learned to morph it into. But some of us are, and some of them I've profiled in the book that are doing exactly that. So we're getting there.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And next, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but how do you navigate the tension between hip hop as like $1 billion industry and hip hop as a grassroots tool for liberation?
That is $1 billion question, my friend.
No, because that's what I was also wondering. It's just like how, I feel like it's just like these big industries can like profit and just like exploit like communities, but like not support them. Or I just 100%. Was wondering. I was just wondering what your 100%. Thoughts are about this.
I mean, 100%. Those who followed hip hop over the years, like again, felt like there was a certain period of time when we were getting, music that was very, pro black or pro anti-establishment or pushing back and being like protest music and being the voice of the people, as Chuck D from Public Enemy once said. It's a CNN of the streets, and it's black people's CNN. They can get these stories out, and then you saw this explosion of the commerce side of it, and it basically takes over because it becomes such a commodity and so lucrative to do the least common denominator type of music, right? Yeah. And like I've always said, like no one wants to listen to Immortal Technique in the club, so they so the Immortal Techniques of the world don't get the push that they should. Mm-hmm. So, and this is an ongoing. First of all, this is not new to hip hop. This is obviously every genre of music, every art form is going to go through this. Particularly in America with black art forms, though. Obviously America's had a history of, like you said, extracting and co-opting and not giving back to the creators of that genre. We've seen it, obviously jazz and rock and roll and so it's a long historic pattern. Mm-hmm. But it does also, happen to everything. Like the reason why we don't see art house films is because we see the Avengers. The big blockbuster movies are going to be, so it's just how art becomes, right? Whenever it becomes commodified. Yeah. And so a lot of people just kind of give up on it, and they're like, well, rap, hip hop's never going to be that. It started to be that. There's actually conspiracy theories that when it began to be that too much, that the industry maybe and government or maybe some folks conspired in a way to say, no, we have to dumb this down. They're getting too much information through rap music. They're getting too much, as I often say, perhaps there was some fear that, again, community, hip hop does community really well, but there was maybe some fear when it started to look like constituency. So that's different.
Oh, okay.
However, whether it was purposeful or it was just the natural course of events that I think art takes when it becomes commodity, whatever. To those who might say hip hop doesn't have that ability anymore, and they look for, it's not on the radio. Where do we get our artists that are speaking about the issues? I push back and I say, that's not going to happen. That's not how, consolidated corporations and, 6 record labels and, 6 radio station, 2 radio station companies. Like, it's not gonna happen anymore. We don't get the idea of protest music like people thought of in the 60s and 70s and even before.
Right.
What we do get from hip hop that none of those genres and none of those artists and none of those songs could ever do is what I'm talking about. Hip hop as an educational tool, hip hop as a way to, help mental health, hip hop as a motivator for entrepreneurship, hip hop as a way to teach young people financial literacy. Kids don't get financial literacy courses in school, but my folks at Pockets Change, which is a great organization, shouts to Dialect, will teach young people financial literacy. 3% of the architects in the country are Black, but the hip hop architecture camp run by Michael Ford out of Detroit will teach young people how to, know about the field of architecture and urban planning through hip hop. 6% of the, I may be wrong in this number, but a very low percent of the entirety of the tech industry are young people of color. But my friends at Breakbeat Code, who are in the book, will teach folks how to learn coding through hip hop. So when we're able to counteract all of these, these things, we find ways to, again, fix all of these problems, So that's where I say to people who say, hip hop had this chance to be the voice of the people, because it was Fight the Power, Chuck D and Public Enemy on the radio, and they don't hear, see, feel, taste, or smell that kind of hip hop anymore. I tell them we should be. I almost don't care. And I get slack from this, but I don't care. I want it in kindergarten. I want young people to be learning that hip hop is a tool of learning. It is a culture of peace, love, unity, and having fun. It's a method of self-expression. It's a method of cross-generational, cross-racial, cross every border unity. And I want them to, and if they learn that in kindergarten, then they'll grow up knowing that hip hop is this beautiful culture of positivity and creativity. And then we won't need to worry so much about what the commerce is doing, because we'll have shown a new generation of young people what it can actually do to enhance humanity. So that's where I want it. So that's the difference. That's how I reconcile. Like, okay, $1 billion, comment. let them live, let them cook, let everyone eat. But we have to do this. Otherwise, we are throwing away the, humanity saving baby with the mumble rap bathwater.
Yeah. No, I agree with you too. Actually, that's the same thing that I thought about with ethnic studies, actually, because, I felt as a person of color, I felt like so invisible, especially like Asian Americans. I feel like our histories often glossed over, and just like I learned about so many activists within the AAPI community. I'm like, I never learned about this. And, in ethnic studies, I learned about more my history and just pride being an Asian American woman. And, I thought too, like, why did I not learn this earlier? Like high school, even high school, like kindergarten. And I felt it's so empowering. Like, we need to uplift, our communities. And that's why I'm so disappointed, so upset at the current administration, like trying to dismantle DEI. Cause it's like, it's so important though. Cause it's like, I think for folks like, walking in our skin, so to say. And then it's just like us feeling invisible, but actually feeling empowered when we hear like these stories that actually resonate and, speak to us. So, I'm totally on board with you too. Like, kindergartners are totally like well equipped to like hold this kind of knowledge.
100%. And I tell you, it's funny you say that. So that was a big turning point for me in realizing this. I grew up around, in a Black neighborhood, generally speaking, went to a Black school. First of all, and this is what makes it that, and again, I say this because this is where the blueprint exists. But if you go to the Bay Area,
Yeah.
the hip hop, the AAPI, in the Bay, like,
No,
and
that's right. Yeah.
come on now.
Lived in the
And
Bay Area for
what is
quite a
it?
long time. Yeah.
Empire, right? And
Uh-huh.
they'll be very much about their cultural heritage, right? Because
Yeah.
they've taken the blueprint and say, well,
Right.
we're not Black Americans. We're gonna rap about our heritage and and you see that throughout the world. And the blueprint to me for that, again, a lot of this is education based, but I didn't look at it that way. I saw it as sort of the beautifully insidious way that hip hop circumvents these systems that are built to do exactly what you say, which is keep you in the dark about this stuff. Because and again, Black neighborhood, Black Black school, 80% Black is where I grew up on Long Island, Westbury. Shouts to Westbury, Strong Island. Okay. My dad was Italian, but he was from Newark, New Jersey. Went to school with Joe Clark from Lean On Me. Studied sociology of minorities, urban studies, right? All the things. So again, was pretty woke, before woke was a thing. I often joke that I knew what gentrification meant when I was 8 because I did. Like, I really did. This is what he was studying. So I'd be like, what is this? And he would always talk to me. And I say all that not to, ask for my, my multicultural card. I say all that to say that even with all of that, and my friends were, Black families, mostly sort of middle class, lower to middle class, but many of them educated, I've been in their houses. I'm having dinner with them. We're listening to music. I say all that to say that even with all that, I didn't know who Benjamin Banneker was. Okay. I didn't know who Lewis Latimer was. I didn't know who Dr. Charles Drew was. I didn't know who Madam C.J. Walker was. These are all brilliant Black American inventors and innovators throughout history. Dr. Charles Drew invented the blood bank. Benjamin Banneker greatly improved the almanac and was the designer for the streets of Washington, D.C. All these. Madam C.J. Walker invented the straightening comb, the hot iron. Right, became one of the first, probably the first Black, African American millionairess. Right. Okay. I didn't know who these people were. Until 1989, when I was a junior in high school, KRS-One came out with a song called You Must Learn. Okay. And if you listen to You Must Learn, KRS-One is critiquing the American school system that doesn't teach us about these people and then went and taught us about each one of those people.
Oh, okay.
Everyone I just mentioned, I learned about them through this one song that KRS-One put out in 1989. Okay. How, incredible is that? Not only is it a critique of the system that kept this information from us, but it's a way to circumvent that very same system by delivering that information to us. Yeah. So what you said is, as a person, as an AAPI, you're growing up in America, your stories don't get told. And if they do, they're the worst stories, right? And hip hop figured out, here's the blueprint. We can fix this. Here's how I did it for Black folk. Just do it for y'all. And everybody can take their heritage, their culture, their untold stories. Yeah. And here's an art form that, first of all, you don't need instruments to play. You don't need anything but your voice. You don't need anything but your mouth. And you could do this, and you could do this worldwide, and your stories will get told. That's why I like to look at hip hop as journalism, as hip hop is oral history. So we have the blueprint from our good friends who started the Black folk, who started the genre and started the culture, and the blueprint is there. And if you respect sort of where it comes from in a holistic, Mother Earth kind of way, if you respect where it comes from, pay homage, not be extracting, give back when you can. I don't think those communities, generally speaking, would be mad if everyone else did the same thing, because it's that's what can bring us all together in these ways that each can understand. Each one teach one, we say.
No, thank you for sharing that, because actually that's what I was thinking about, because amplifying marginalized voices is incredibly important to me, and just having people see the value in their stories, and that's what I'm hoping to do with my platform. So how does hip hop help young people, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, reclaim their voice, confidence, and sense of possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you, but like I say, there are people that do that work every day, all day, and give them a voice in places where they don't feel like they're, like you said, they don't feel seen or they don't feel heard, and we see that in schools, and we see that in we see it in churches, we see any institutional space.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the real common denominator is that this is we could people, a lot of educators I speak to will go to the the Board of Education and say, we want to bring these hip hop programs into school because we know that if we give kids the opportunity, they will take that opportunity. Mikhail Amin talks about this in the book where he says that he goes to young people and he gives them the opportunity to express themselves.
Okay.
And they will, like through this format, through this medium, right?
Yeah.
Where they haven't before. And they'll tell him, they'll say, I never felt comfortable. I never felt comfortable doing this. They'll say that, they tell us to leave that at the door, come in the classroom and I have a piece somewhere, it's unpublished, but where a student comes into the classroom and they start banging on the desk, making a pattern. We used to do that in the lunchroom. We would make the beats for the rappers. We just bang on the decks, and we'd make like drum patterns. And what a teacher will do? Hey, cut that noise out. Stop it. Cut it out.
Right.
But science has shown that kids who are nervous, maybe a test is coming up. Maybe they just got no confrontation. Maybe they're, worried that they're not going to pass this next test. But science has shown that repetitive motions, repetitive, sounds, loops, right? Drum patterns have been shown to be able to help young people regulate and self-regulate and come down a little bit. I just interviewed Spin the Spectrum, which is a program out of Dallas, Texas, that teaches DJ classes to neurodivergent youth. And and kids with autism and I had Andrew Wang, who's a music educator and also is neurodivergent himself, who said I learned to self-regulate by doing beatboxing, making beats with the mouth. He says those patterns, that regulation, that keeps me stable. So that's a way of like you said, feeling seen. Yeah. When I tell you, why? First of all, why are you drumming on the desk? Like what is that? What are you doing? Oh, maybe he's not self-regulated. Maybe he just likes making beats. Oh, do you actually make beats outside of the classroom? Do you have like production software? No, what's that all about? All right, talk to me after class. I want to, put you on whatever you like. These are just simple ways. But the thing about hip hop is that it's very much ingrained in your children's lives. Yeah. So when I say the educators go to the Board of Education and want to bring these thoughts or these programs, and they say, oh no, we don't want like rap in the school. We don't want hip hop in the school. Hip hop's already in the school. Hip hop's already in your kids. They talk hip hop. They breathe hip hop. They the music. This is how they relate to each other. Most of the little sayings that come out, like start in a rap song or get amplified or popularized in a rap song. It's in the school. So if you're not addressing that as adults, as the teachers, as the parents, to be honest, because a lot of our parents will be like, well, it's not my kind of stuff. And they shrug it off. Right. You're not seeing your kids. Your kids won't be seen. Your kids will feel unseen and unheard because that is how they see the world. That's the stuff that they refer to each other. So when you give them that opportunity, and again, Mikhail Amin, Chris Emden with the Science Genius program in schools, Dr. Raphael Travis, who's done work with mental health and young people, Spin the Spectrum, Andrew Wang, all these people do this. And the one through line is that young people will say, oh, I feel seen. I feel heard. I feel like you're letting me express myself in the way I want to. Not the way you're telling me to, and and the results will speak for themselves time and time and time again. Yeah. So just, I gave you 10 examples. I could give you 100.
No, I had such a wonderful time talking with you today, but just lastly, before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but if you could leave our listeners with one truth about culture, justice, and transformation, what would it be? Hip hop could save America. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't know if it's a truth. I'm trying to think it's a truth. I think that if we look at the characteristics and traits, I don't mean we're going to rap our way out of, injustice. It's not about that necessarily. It is about the fact that I've now given a bunch of examples where music doesn't necessarily live, right? Like popular music doesn't necessarily live in an English classroom. Yeah. Hip hop remixes things and we put things together that shouldn't be there and we create amazing things. Created things that like most of America likes. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't care if you're the most,
right wing leaning, and I'm not getting political, but like that's the way conservative country and Western music. Your country and Western music is being flavored by hip hop right now, and you're loving it. Like it's
no, totally
100%. So it's there, and I'm saying that within the DNA.
Yeah.
Like the way hip hop minded folks, this is where the cultural strategist part comes in. It's just seeing the world in that way and not being afraid to mix those two things together. And I talk about it a lot in the book. That's where culture becomes the driver. Yeah. It's not, because everything now is culture war.
Right.
I think the answer is in culture peace. Yeah. And it's this way of thinking of saying, hey, listen, if we are all one, right? Because, we supposedly are all one deep down inside. Like I said, I've never seen anything quite prove that in praxis, in existence, in person, more than this particular culture that was born out of a need for that. And it's absolutely at its heart and soul a remix culture. And if we're going to be one world, we have to all be kind of mashed up and blended. And if we're, we're obviously doing that physically, because the demographics are changing.
No, totally.
The graphics are changing. And when we learn to do it culturally, I think we lead to transformative ways of creating justice for all.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I really did have a wonderful conversation with you, but how can people find you if they'd like to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I have two main places and they're easy to remember. The name is Manny Faces, mannyfaces.com. Even if you spell it wrong, just Google it. You'll find me. There's not a lot of people, except for the old He-Man doll, which was spelled differently, but also I don't want any trademark infringement. So let's not talk about that.
Wait, there's a He-Man doll?
There's a He-Man doll. Yeah.
That's so funny.
He has 3 faces and they spin. It's Man-E faces. And so totally coincidental, totally incidental. Don't get me. But so mannyfaces.com, it's me. It's like kind of points to, all the stuff that I do speaking, and the book is there, of course, but also hiphopcansaveamerica.com. And that's more important than the me. You could find me there too. That's the podcast. I have a great newsletter where I send out stories like this. Cool. And we have a live stream and of course the book as well. So Hip Hop Can Save America.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again for your time. I truly, had a great time talking with you, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, and wish you much success.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. It's always an honor when someone wants to have me on their platform. So thank you. Thank you.
No, of course. Okay, goodbye. Thank you for being here and tuning in to Voices That Propel Us, stories of justice, action, and community. Your presence in this movement matters. If today's conversation moved you, share it, talk about it, and keep the work going. Together, we're not just imagining change, we're making it. Until next time, stay bold, stay grounded, and stay in the fight.
Every time I feel so mad and sad and bad, I say to myself, relax, lean back.